Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Monday morning. Mike Elko, Texas A&M, making what I think is a fascinating addition in the transfer portal as former Texas and Alabama tight end Amari Niblack committing to Texas A&M. Now, look, there's two different ways that you can look at this commitment. Number one was a non-factor for Texas in 2024. Or you can look at it and say, hey, we're just 12 months removed from this kid being the number one tight end in the transfer portal when he was going over to Texas. And the guy that 6 months ago was on a lot of NFL draft boards in terms of being one of the best tight ends that we saw in the country going into 2024. No, obviously did not work out at Texas. We talk about this all the time, and this is something Mike Elko truly believes in terms of how he wants to build this program, that is betting on some upside. You look at Amari Niblack and say, all right, it's a little bit of a risk because he wasn't all that good for Texas in 2024, at least didn't really play much for Texas. But there's also a lot of upside that Amari can bring to this Texas A&M team. And I think Texas A&M has put themselves in a spot where this makes a lot of sense. I mean, you bring in Nate Borkisher from Texas or from Nebraska. You bring in Micah Riley from Auburn. You got some really good baseline tight ends. You know, they're not going to be first team all SEC kind of guys. They're probably not going to be top 100 NFL draft picks, but you know you have solid tight ends heading into 2025, but you probably don't have that guy that offers a really high ceiling and can be just a legitimate matchup nightmare in this Texas A&M offense. Amari Niblack can be that guy. Now it's a little bit of boom or bust, right? He might just not play a ton for Texas A&M, or he might be one of the best pass catchers for this Texas A&M team in 2025. But you're introducing a ceiling to this tight end room for Texas A&M that you didn't have 24 hours ago. That's what fascinates me the most. Again, they've put themselves in a position where they can go bet on Amari Niblack. You know, if there just wasn't a lot of tight ends that you trusted in this room, Amari was probably not a guy you'd want to go after. But because you've built up that, pretty high floor in terms of what your tight end room is going to be, it allows you to go take a risk in terms of introducing a high upside caliber guy like Amari to this tight end room. Now, I want to get into a little bit of what we saw from Amari going back to the 2023 year at Alabama, talk about what he can bring to Texas A&M, talk about some of the question marks we have before we do, and as always, Texas A&M fans, it's been real fun talking this program over the last couple of weeks. I mean, this is the 14th commitment. I think we've broken down every single one of them. The amount of support y'all have continued to show to the boys, it means the absolute world. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Now, again, 2024 kind of fell off, right? Just didn't play much for Texas in the 2024 year. You go back to 2023, this was a legitimate matchup nightmare at the tight end spot. He played about it was about a 50-50 split in terms of in line attached to the offensive line or split out wide as a jumbo pass catcher. He can do a lot of different things. You start with the question marks. It's probably, what does he do blocking? I am positive that Mike Elko addressed this with Amari Niblack. You know, if you're going to come play for Texas A&M and you expect to play for Texas A&M in the 2025 year, you cannot be a liability when it comes to run blocking. And I'm guessing Amari Niblack probably understands that, or else he wouldn't be committing to Texas A&M. Now, I think secondly, as a pass catcher, this is the ceiling that you're introducing. I don't think Amari's ever going to be an elite inline blocking tight end. That's just not really his skill set. But as a pass catcher, I mean, this kid can work vertically at the tight end spot just about as good as any tight end in the country. Legitimate long speed to this kid. And what I think is so interesting is you look at Texas A&M last year in 2024, you didn't really have that matchup nightmare. I mean, you had some solid tight ends, but you didn't have a real tight end that scared opposing defenses, especially working that deeper third. Amari Niblack's a guy that if you want to work him, kind of up the seam. There's just not a lot of linebackers that can carry this kid working up the seam. There's, quite frankly, not a lot of safeties that can run with Amari Niblack too. And if you're a safety that can run with him, can you deal with the 6'4", 245 frame? And so you are getting a guy that, because of the size-speed combination, is going to be really difficult for opposing defenses to deal with. Now, do you get that version we know is in there for Amari Niblack? You go back to 2023, 20 catches, over 327 yards, averaged almost 16 yards or almost 17 yards per catch. This kid can be a difference maker for Texas A&M. Now, it's a high risk, high reward thing. Mike Elko, this is how he wants to build it. We kind of led with this. He routinely, whether it's in the transfer portal with a guy like Julian Humphrey or whether it's on the high school recruiting trail, he is going to bet on size and speed. And that's not a bad way to run a program. I mean, at the end of the day, football, it's a size and speed sport. If you have guys that are big and fast, you're probably going to be a pretty good football team. And Amari Niblack's one of those guys. Now, does he put it together for Texas A&M? That's what we're going to find out over the next couple of months. It's hard to find players in the transfer portal that have legitimate NFL upside. Amari Niblack's one of them. And again, it did not work out in 2024, but we are only 12 months removed from talking about this kid being potentially one of the best tight ends in the country. Do we get that version that we know is in there for him in the 2025 season? And that's kind of largely how Texas A&M has operated in the transfer portal, where you kind of look at the 14 commitments they have coming in. There's a lot of guys that just give you a really high floor. And we talked about Micah Riley or Nate Borkisher. Tyler O'Neill from Iowa State probably fits that. But then you scroll down and say, we're betting on some upside too, like Samuel Mpemba. The guy that's going into year 3 has not necessarily played a ton of football or elite football yet at Georgia, but has a ton of upside. You start scrolling down and say, you have some of these guys that are coming in and bringing upside. Micah Hudson, probably another guy, Julian Humphrey as well. I'm a fan of what Texas A&M has done in the portal. They've added some really quality depth. They've added some players that maybe have some question marks, but give a ton of upside to Texas A&M too. And that's probably where Amari Niblack comes into this team. Got to bet on upside sometimes. And I think that's what Texas A&M is doing. And look, Mike Elko is not approaching the transfer portal from a desperation spot at the tight end position. You have Nate Borkisher, you have Micah Riley, you have a solid tight end group. So Texas A&M going after Amari Niblack and ending up landing him tells me that Mike Elko is pretty confident that you can get that elite version of Amari Niblack that we all know is in there. We'll pause it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. This kid is immediately, to me, going to become one of the more exciting storylines to monitor in spring practice. Because, again, Mike Riley, Nate Borkisher, you kind of know what you're getting. Amari Niblack could be a guy that really emerges and becomes a focal point within this Texas A&M offense. We'll close it down there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later.